Okay, let's talk about a philosopher who literally laughed at the universe. And you know what? He had a really good reason to. His name was Democritus, and his ideas, well, they were so ahead of their time they were almost completely wiped from history.
So, this is Democritus. He was known back in ancient Greece as the laughing philosopher, and it's not because he was cracking jokes all the time, no. His cheerfulness came from something much deeper. He looked at the world, and instead of finding it scary or confusing, he found it just endlessly amusing. So, what did he know that we don't? What was his secret? To get why he was so cheerful, you first have to understand this huge philosophical puzzle he was up against. It was a real brain twister, a problem so deep it basically threatened to prove that reality itself was just one big illusion.
See, back in Democritus's day, some really smart thinkers, guys like Parmenides, had kind of argued themselves into a corner. They used what seemed like flawless logic, but it created this massive problem for, understanding the world as we know it.
Okay, so here's the knot they tied themselves in. They figured that for something to be real, what they called being, it had to be one single, solid, unchanging block of stuff. Why? Well, because for things to change or move around, there has to be empty space for them to move into, right? But that empty space, that not being, that's just nothing. And how can nothing exist? It sounds like a total contradiction.
And the conclusion they came to was just wild. If there's no such thing as empty space, then movement and change, they can't be real. They have to be illusions. So the world you and I see every day, things moving, growing, changing, they argued it couldn't actually be real. A brilliant piece of logic for sure, but man, it just flies in the face of everything we experience. So along comes Democritus. He looks at this impossible puzzle, and with one stunningly simple idea, he just slices right through the whole knot. He didn't even try to argue with their logic. Instead, he just completely changed the rules of the game.
He basically just declared, hey, you know that nothing, that void you say can't exist? Well, it does. He said the void is just as real as the stuff in it. By putting solid matter, the atoms, and empty space on the same level, he suddenly made motion and change possible again. It was this beautiful, elegant sidestep that reopened the door to actually explaining the universe. And what's moving around in that void? Atoms. These tiny, indestructible little building blocks that make up everything. He called them atomos, which in Greek literally means uncuttable. These were it, the rock-bottom, fundamental, unchangeable particles of all reality.
And what's so cool is how these simple little particles could explain, well, everything. He imagined there were an infinite number of them, all different shapes and sizes, some with little hooks, some with barbs, some perfectly round. And they're just constantly, eternally zipping through the void, bumping into each other, linking up, and forming everything that we see around us.
He came up with this fantastic analogy to explain it. Think of atoms like letters of the alphabet. You only have, 26 letters? But with just those few letters, you can combine them in infinite ways to create every word, every sentence, every book ever written. In the same way, a variety of atoms can combine to form the incredible, rich complexity of the entire world. Okay, so if the whole universe is really just tiny, colorless, tasteless atoms whizzing around in empty space, then what about the world we actually experience? A world filled with color and taste and heat. Well, Democritus had an answer for that too, and believe me, it was just as revolutionary.
This is probably his most famous idea, and it totally flips our idea of reality on its head. He's saying that things like sweet or bitter or blue, they aren't real properties that exist out there in the world. They're just conventions. They're experiences that happen inside of us. Take the taste of honey, for example. The honey isn't inherently sweet. What's really happening is that the smooth, round atoms of the honey are rolling over the atoms on your tongue, and your brain interprets that interaction as sweetness. A bitter taste? That's just sharp, jagged atoms hitting your tongue. The heat from a fire? That's nothing more than the sensation of super fast-moving atoms hitting your skin. It's all just an interaction between the atoms out there and the atoms that make you up.
So how do we even perceive these things? How do the atomic shapes get from an object to us? Democritus had a theory for this too. He thought that objects were constantly shedding these super thin films of atoms, almost like a snake shedding its skin. He called them idola, or images. These little atomic blueprints fly through the air, hit our eyes or our nose, and that's what creates our perception of the world. Okay, This is where it gets really deep. If our entire worlds, everything in it, is just atoms and void, what about us? What about our souls, our thoughts, our feelings? If everything is physical, that leaves no room for anything supernatural. So, what does that make us?
And Democritus didn't back down from this at all. He just applied his atomic theory directly to what it means to be human. And this, right here, is how we get back to why he was the laughing philosopher.
To him, the soul wasn't some mystical, ghostly thing. Nope, it was physical, too. He argued it was made of these special, superfine, perfectly spherical atoms. Fire atoms, he called them, that were incredibly mobile. They zip around our bodies, and that motion is what we call life and thought and consciousness. And when we die, those atoms just scatter. That's it.
And this is the absolute key to everything. If you really truly understand that you are just a collection of atoms moving according to the laws of nature in a void, then what is there to be afraid of? There are no angry gods to punish you. There's no terrifying afterlife to worry about. The whole point of life, he said, was to reach a state he called euthymia, which basically means cheerfulness, a calm, untroubled state of mind.
This is exactly why he laughed. It wasn't just being happy-go-lucky. It was the deep, profound sense of freedom that comes from understanding how the universe actually works. He felt like he had cracked the code, and he saw that it was all a place of natural, predictable order, not random, divine chaos. And knowing that, he believed, frees us from all our biggest fears and anxieties. It lets us live a genuinely peaceful life. But hold on. If his ideas were this powerful, I mean, he was basically predicting modern atomic theory 2,000 years early, why isn't he a household name like Plato or Aristotle? Well, this is where the story gets a little tragic. The history of ideas isn't always kind to the winners.
It's just heartbreaking, really. Democritus wrote over 70 books, 70, on everything from physics and ethics to mathematics and music, and every single one of them is lost, gone forever. All we have left are tiny fragments and quotes from other writers, and a lot of those writers were the very people who were arguing against him.
You can see how his ideas just faded away. He comes up with his atomic theory way back around 460 BCE. A few decades later, you have Plato, who reportedly hated Democritus's work so much he wanted to burn all his books. Then you have Aristotle, who saw him as a major rival and spent a lot of time arguing against him. His ideas were basically pushed to the side, criticized, and suppressed for centuries. It wasn't until about 1,800 years later that guys like John Dalton brought atomic theory back into science, which makes you realize we lost almost 2 millennia of progress. And that just leaves us with this incredible what-if question, doesn't it? Just think about how differently our history might have played out if those 70 books had survived. What would our world look like today if his brilliantly cheerful, scientific way of looking at the universe had won out back in ancient Greece? It's a staggering thought, and it's a real testament to the laughing philosopher whose incredible vision was almost lost to time.